There are these waterways and wigwam canoes, and it's really their story that tells the unbroken story of Chicago architecture. As they were paddling along these waterways before our first settlers, there was a medicinal herb along the side of the river. It's in the allium or the leek family, and it's called Chautauqua. So our city is actually named after a medicinal herb for the indigenous people. Let's take a look at Foster and Partners from London. The roof is made of carbon fiber. It's got 4 support columns inside. It's hugging the site. If we were on a helicopter looking down at Apple, Michigan Avenue, what do you think it would remind us of? A Mac Pro notebook, computer, and iPad. So now we'll jump, so it's contextual with the Apple products. Let's jump now back to our left. Just past the bridge, you can see a curved stone building with a temple up on the top. This is London House, another historic style of architecture. It was completed in 1923, right after the Wrigley building, and it was designed by Alfred Alschuler. Now, this style of architecture is called Beaux-Arts, meaning fine art, and Beaux-Arts buildings have Corinthian columns, flags, urns, grand entrances. They remind us of buildings of ancient Greece, ancient Rome. That style is also called neoclassical. Now, the London House now is straight on your left. It's been adaptively reused, which means they repurpose the building into a block of hotels. That tower up at the top is an architectural term called a belvedere, which means beautiful view. And as we go by London House, you'll see a restaurant at the top there that surely has a beautiful view of us down here on the boat. Now, Daniel Burnham had said he wanted Chicago to look like Paris on the prairie. So I like to say with our Beaux-Arts London House and our Wrigley building, as we start our journey today, we like to think we have a little bit of a Parisian feel, but you'll see that'll change as we go further on our journey. Now, up ahead to the left is a building that looks like a sand castle. It's got a tower up on the top and 4 towers on the corners. This is 35 East Wacker. It was completed in 1926, and it was designed by this firm of Yaver and Dinkelberg. This is another example of the Beaux-Arts style of architecture. Dinkelberg of Yaver and Dinkelberg designed the Flatiron Building in New York City along with Daniel Burnham. Now, the 4 towers are cleverly disguised water tanks. Up at the top is a speakeasy where it's rumored that Al Capone used to party, but that's not true because he was already at Alcatraz when the Stratosphere Club opened up. And inside it was an elevator that you could drive your car and go up inside because it was called the Jeweler's Building. So people could take their emeralds and diamonds and drive from the street in a car and take an elevator up that building. Now, we're going to go up ahead past the next bridge on your left, and you can see kind of a grayish building stone with stainless steel accents in the middle. This is our Leo Burnett building here in Chicago, completed in 1989. This is our first example of postmodernism. Postmodern buildings, I mentioned 1980s to 2000s. They reference where they live, or they reference other buildings around them. It's called a contextual style of architecture. And it's kind of a fun, playful style of architecture. As you look at the Leo Burnett building, as your eye travels down the sides about 2/3 of the way down, you can see some shoulders that are pointing or contextual to the two buildings next to it. Now, this building is still home to worldwide advertising agency Leo Burnett, which has brought us such advertising icons here in the United States as the Jolly Green Giant, the Maytag Repairman, Fly the Friendly Skies, Tony the Tiger, and even the Pillsbury Doughboy. When I was researching for the tour, I found a blog where he had died of a yeast infection. I don't think it's true. True story though. Past the bridge, next you can see a tall glass building with white trim. Very tall, another example. Another example of this postmodern style. This was completed in 1992, postmodern, and the architect was Ricardo Bofill. So you might say, well, Mary, what is this building referencing? We say it looks like the Parthenon on steroids, referencing the Parthenon in ancient Greece. The triangular element up at the top is an architectural element called a pediment, like you see on our Art Institute or many buildings in ancient Greece. Another beautiful example of postmodernism. Right next to it on the left past the bridge is our first residence on our tour. And you can see some carve-outs. The building's from 2014. It was redone, and those carve-outs represent the river. The lower carve-out is a outdoor bar and movie theater where people that live in that building can look at us down here on our river running trip. And the lower carve-out points out the next building on your left, which is our first example of Art Deco here. This is the LaSalle Wacker building. It was completed in 1930, and the firm was Halliburton Group. Now, in 1923, they were afraid Chicago was going to become an urban canyon, too many skyscrapers. So they came up with some zoning, and they said that you can take your building up 22 stories, and you can do a tower behind it. So this building almost looks like an armchair because of the zoning. Art Deco buildings are often limestone, and the dark element in there recedes, and the windows look very vertical. Now, the LaSalle Wacker building was an iconic building in Chicago. It was home to United Airlines at one point, and McDonald's is from Chicago. And Ray Kroc had an office in there. And imagine back in the day, an elevator operator takes you up in the LaSalle Wacker building and says, "Welcome to Hamburger Heaven." Straight on your left as we go under the bridge is kind of old and new layers in the canyon combined. It's the building straight to your left with the penthouse up on the top. You can see a historic building from the 1920s, and then it's called the Builders Building. In the 1980s, they did an addition. And so this postmodern side of this building is actually kind of nodding back to the original building in that postmodern way. Now, past the bridge on the left, there's one, two. It's the third building past the bridge. It's kind of a pinkish building. It's got two towers coming up. It looks like two toothpicks all the way up at the top. This is 225 West Wacker, another example of this postmodernism. It's completed in 1989. You might say, okay, what is that nodding to? The two towers all the way up at the top are referencing the bridges, towers that were going underneath. And in the very middle of 225 West Wacker, it looks like a bridge. So it's kind of contextual with the bridges that were traveling underneath here. We're approaching what's called the confluence of the Chicago River, and we're going to turn over to your right, and we'll explore those buildings, and then we'll come back down over to your left. We've got a couple of new formations here that change this part of the river straight ahead. Both of the buildings went up in 2017. So if you were on the tour earlier, you wouldn't have seen these two buildings. But before we approach those, let's stay on the left, and you can see it from here. It's kind of the greenish-hued, curved building that's curving here with the confluence of the river. This is 333 West Wacker. Now, believe it or not, this building was completed in 1983. It's contextual. It's not a contemporary building. It's a perennial Chicago favorite building, award-winning the 6 different colors of glass. Almost act like a chameleon. We'll go by it a couple of times today, but depending on the amount of sun and the type of day, the building really changes. Now, at the base of 333 West Wacker is a sound-deadening base because of 5 stories on the bottom, because you can see there's trains that go back behind there, and it would be very loud if you worked in there. The firm that designed 333 West Wacker is called KPF. Now, sometimes you might catch a view. I think we're going to get it right now. Staying on the left, if you see this train, our elevated train go by, it's going to go by this building that looks like across the river an upside-down wine bottle, 150 North Riverside. And we're going to cover that as we head back down from the North Bridge. But this is kind of one of my favorite shots here in Chicago. Straight behind us here, you can see Arches National Park, a building with parabolic arches up at the top and down at the bottom. This is from 2017. It's River Point by Picard Chilton Architects, and that red sculpture on the front of River Point was put in during the pandemic. It's called the Constellation by Santiago Calatrava. But when they built River Point, they had to set it back because of the railroad tracks, and you can see underneath these portholes by the green space here, and they've actually got fans in them, and that's because an active railroad track, trains travel underneath River Point there. So we'll talk about that wine bottle building as we head back. Now we're getting ready to, I like to call it a stalactite, drop it out of the sky since we're in the canyon. But now we're kind of going to jump as we're on the north branch of the Chicago River. So let's for now stay on your left, and just past this white building, you can see kind of a light pink brick building. This is Frank Abbott. Now, Fulton House was actually, it's a historic style warehouse. Was a giant refrigerator. It was a cold storage warehouse for swine and cattle carcasses. And when they got ready to adaptively reuse Fulton House and convert it, it took 18 months to prep the site. There's horsehair inside that insulated, and 6 months just to thaw the building out because it was a giant refrigerator, and they were afraid they were going to lose bricks, so they put these starfish there, which are steel reinforcement rods, to keep the building from cracking. Now, architect Harry Weiss did the adaptive reuse of Fulton House. He liked working on the river, so he decided to do our next building on your left, which is from 1988, postmodern, and these are called river cottages. Now, these kind of look like sailboats. Harry Weiss, the architect himself, was a sailor. We've got triangular elements going up. We kind of got portholes that remind us of a sailing element. But if you bought one of these in 1988, you know, it would have been risky because the river didn't look anything like it looks today. But if you had done that, it would have been a good investment, because in 2015, one of those river cottages sold for $2.25 million, and I'm not sure how much a river cottage would sell for here today. Now, jumping over to your right, this kind of barn, bluish building is our iconic East Bay Club here in Chicago. But when it was built, it's a high-end health club, and people have business lunches there. When it was built in 1979, there would have been no kayaks, no windows, because the river was contaminated, and you would have worked out overlooking the neighborhood. The windows were added later, which is our River North neighborhood. Now, the East Bay Club has had such notable members as Oprah Winfrey, our former mayor, Rahm Emanuel, as well as Barack Obama. Now, let's take a look over on the left, 20 years later. So, 79, now all of a sudden it's 2001. And look at how people are starting to embrace the river. The river is cleaning up. These are called the Kinsey Park Tower residents. And I love going by these because you'll see people like walking strollers and really enjoying our river running through it here today. And the leaves change. And this complex is comprised of the townhomes as well as the tower back up behind there. Now we're gonna jump back over to your right, just past the bridge, and you probably can identify this is another historic warehouse from 1909, and it's been adaptively reused. It was originally a warehouse, and then it was also a railroad terminal. But when they adaptively reuse this, they didn't have zoning yet along the river. So look at those balconies where they're actually sitting right on the river from these riverbank lofts. And then the way they attach those balconies, they're kind of cantilevering or floating out there, and they're just bolted to the side. But they've got the still, that you can tell, the tall historic windows. We have a saying here in Chicago, when we convert these buildings, we're converting them from warehouse to your house. Maybe where you live too, next time you see some conversion. Oh, warehouse to my house. Or you might live in one of those too. Coming up next on your right, you can see a dark water tower, and you can see a white framed building right next to that dark water tower. Take a look at the asymmetrical balconies on that building, Erie on the Park, 2002. Now, I like to point this out because you can see those V's going up the side and the white steel there. That's an architectural mechanism called external bracing when you do that on the outside of the building. And what that external bracing allows you to do is get more space inside where you don't have support columns inside. So Erie on the Park is actually a place where you pay more for an obstructed view. Is anybody on the boat from St. Louis? So not too many go-karts, but our friends in St. Louis were too happy that we were gonna reverse the flow of our river and flow our sewage down by their beautiful gateway city. And so they embarked on a lawsuit, and it was January 2nd, 1900, and the project was complete. But there was some concern it would be put on hold. So in a Chicago way, the bosses of the project came out, they blew the last dam, holding in the river. The Chicago River was officially reversed. One of the greatest engineering feats in the history of the world, although we do have many environmental groups looking at that here today. But as I've talked about, there was a lot of work still to be done on this river, and I like to credit our local water reclamation district as well as our friends of the Chicago River that were able to enjoy this cruise on the river here today. And today Chicago has one of the most sophisticated drinking filtration systems in the world. It's quite a change from drinking fish. Chicago is also home to the skyscraper. In the mid-1800s, the word skyscraper meant a tall hat, a mast on a ship, anything pointing toward the sky, but it did not mean a tall building. In 1885, William LeBaron Jenney designed the Home Insurance Building here in Chicago. It's the first skeletal frame skyscraper. And I'd say, okay, Mary, what's a skeletal frame skyscraper? Let's look up on the left at that bridge that's kind of tilted, and we'll go underneath that coming up. But imagine that bridge is pointing straight toward the sky. That's a skeletal frame. And then you put masonry or bricks down the side of that, and that allows you to take your buildings taller. Because until this skeletal frame skyscraper came out, for a building to go taller, it had to get wider and wider at the base, almost like a pyramid. So this kind of revolutionized building technology, this skeletal frame. Now you notice we've been going under a lot of bridges. There's 25 bridges on our tour today. So back and forth, 50. The bridges opened yesterday. They open now mainly for recreational traffic, spring and fall. But there's little houses on the side where the bridge tenders used to live. And they used to open on demand, which would have been a big pain going to work. But the types of bridges we have here are called trunnion bascule, and we call it a Chicago bridge. So bascule means like a seesaw, and a trunnion is a pivot point. So if you look at my elbow, they work like this. You got your pivot point and your seesaw. So if you envision like French doors opening up to the sky, that's a double leaf trunnion bascule bridge. Or if you just have one arm going back. And as we go back to our next bridge, this is, they open and shut this bridge once a year. It's historically protected, but it was originally a railroad bridge. And so it always sits like this, but as we go by, there's no railroads in that part of town anymore. But as we go by, you can see a big yellow block underneath the bridge here, and that's the counterweight that pulls these seesaw trunnion bascule bridges up. And they did have small motors at the time. That bridge, I think, is from 1908, but that is where our first railroad bridge went in the 1850s. Now we're coming back to the confluence. Sloping steel columns. Those columns are from Luxembourg. They're 40% stronger than regular steel, and they're fabricated in our neighboring state of Wisconsin. Now, they only used 75% of the lot when they built this 150 North Riverside. So you can see that concrete spine going by there. It's really a spectacular marble here. Now, as we go by, if you look over to your right, sometimes, depends on the weather, but you can get a photo of the boat kind of reflected on the side of this building. Hope some of you guys got that shot of the crane here. A couple of my favorite little restaurants are there. Oh yeah, you can kind of see us up here, and we might get some shade here. There you go. So you can see us on our river running through it there on the side of 150 North Riverside. And we'll talk a little more about that building. Now we're heading down what's called the South Branch of the Chicago River. We're going to jump around a little bit here. Let's jump over to your left, past the bridge, at the kind of rippled, shining building with the stainless steel tridents here. This is a brand new building that went up during the pandemic. It's the Bank of America Tower 2020, and it was designed by Guest Partners, the same people that brought us our upside down wine bottle here, 150 North Riverside. Now these guys had kind of a trapezoidal lot to work with, not as hard as the last one. So they came up with this idea of these serrated edges, and then these stainless steel tridents actually support the building going all the way up. And over the years, some legislation came along the river where you need 30 feet or 10 meters of open space. So here at Bank America, they've actually framed creatively a river walk in front of the building. It's part of the building. So it's a nice place to kind of walk along the river. Now, up ahead on your left, you can probably identify this. This is an Art Deco building. It's our Civic Opera House. It doesn't really look like an armchair. It looks like a throne. It was completed in 1929. What happened in 1929? stock market crash. They showed one play, Aida, Graham Anderson Ferguson Life, but it has the arms that were office building towers that helped them support during the Depression. Now, if you look up at the the uniformity, but the shell, the white shell now is a little more sophisticated than the glass, and it helps the building hold up in the wind. It's a concrete shell. And then it's got the flat roof. So right next to us here, next to our shell building, is another example of that external bracing. It's a low building with the bronze X's on the outside. That allows for open space. That was a training floor originally. Now it's a health club, and it's a health club I go to in Oak Park. And it looks like what I might do, where I'll go to the health club, and then I'll go to our iconic Chicago Corner Bakery right after that. You can probably kind of tell, I'll give you a clue on this next building. The year is 1983. So now we've jumped into postmodernism. You'll notice the building is very contextual. It's nodding to the river. It's kind of rippling as we go by with the river. So giving a nod in the way these postmodern buildings do. And all of these, once again, were done by the firm of Skidmore, and now we call them SOM here in Chicago. Holy cow, let's look past the bridge on your right. Is that a skyscraper, or is that a massive brown scraper? This is our old post office, completed in 1921, with addition in 1934, the arms by Graham Anderson Ferguson White. The floorboards on the old post office are the equivalent of 4 U.S. football fields. Why? Branch called South Bank. And instead of having a river walk, they almost have like a boardwalk here, like you would see in Atlantic City. There's 2 new towers that have gone up. Additionally, eventually this is going to be 2,700 residents here in this part of town. But this is the site of Chicago's original Grand Central State neighborhood, and luckily some rains come. 18,000 buildings have been destroyed. 100,000 of 300,000 citizens have been left homeless. We don't know the count, but it looks like luckily only 300 people perished. It's probably higher than that. But within a week of the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, 1,600 lean-to buildings go up around Chicago. People from the East Coast come here to make money and help us rebuild the city. And by 1873, we're hosting a technology fair within 2 years of the fire. So what caused the Great Conflagration? Was it Daisy the milk cow? It wasn't Milk Bar. Was it men playing poker? Mrs. O'Leary's part of an Irish neighborhood. A lot of the guys were playing poker. Was it children playing in the barn with matches? Was it embers from another fire in the Midwest? Or was it a comet? Well, the truth is, we don't know.